By the time I was 10 years old, my father bought a restaurant and I started working there with him because I just wanted to hang out with my dad when I was 10. And by the time I was 18, I was running the show with him. By the time I was 21, I opened up two of my own restaurants. And then shortly thereafter, dove into real estate development and flipping houses as a way to build different revenue streams. And then ended up falling in love with real estate big time. And from there, everything shifted and I went all in on real estate into the development side.
Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond Podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day.
This is Jennifer J. Hammond, and I'm so excited. We have Pamela Bardhi here today, and I had the pleasure to be on her podcast. So this is so much fun because now we get to reverse the flow, and I get to ask her questions. So Pamela, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. It's such an honor. You are amazing.
Well, thank you. I think you're amazing too. And I love it because you are somebody who's very passionate about education and helping people understand real estate. But let's go ahead and let's start a little bit with your story. Will you share a little bit about your story?
For sure. Yeah. So I came to the United States when I was about 5 years old. And from there, I pretty much watched my parents build everything from the ground up because they had won the visa lottery to come here. So they didn't know that they were going to come here. So not knowing any English, no family, barely had any money saved. My brother was 9 months old and I was 5 years old. Wow. So that's how they came. And they just believed in the American dream that they would build everything from the ground up. So pretty much by the time I was 10 years old, my father bought a restaurant and I started working there with him because I just wanted to hang out with my dad when I was 10. And by the time I was 18, I was running the show with him. By the time I was 21, I opened up two of my own restaurants. And then shortly thereafter, dove into real estate development and flipping houses as a way to build different revenue streams. And then ended up falling in love with real estate big time. And from there, everything shifted. And I went all in on real estate into the development side, construction and brokerage, and it's all morphed me where I am now, more in like the consulting and the education space in real estate, where my heart truly is. And that's where I'm at to date.
Wow. I love that. And that's so well done. I can't believe you said all that so quickly. And there's so many things that I wanted to talk about. I mean, number one, I think that coming from a different country and then realizing the American dream, it's funny because I think so often if someone grew up here, so often and I'm going to say we, because even for me, I grew up in Key West and I remember, so this will really date me to how old I am, but I was in the 80s. We had a lot of Cubans that were swimming over from Cuba to get to touch land. Because back then, if you could touch land, you could get asylum. And we would have these kids, they would come to our high school. And I remember just being like, I don't know why they're paying attention. They're so interested in learning. And at that point in my life, I had an alcoholic mom and there was a lot of other problems at home that I was much more concerned with than learning. But I was so inspired by these immigrant teenagers who were so interested in learning in school. And I was like, what do you mean? And it made me realize that I took so much for granted. Even though my life wasn't easy, I still took so much about the American dream and they inspired me. So I love your story. Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about where you are today. You are located in Boston, right?
Boston, Massachusetts. Yes, indeed.
Yay! So as you know, I've been in Washington, D.C. for many years, but I'm in Florida more often than anywhere else these days. So tell us about what's happening in Boston right now. Because, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the fact that people are afraid of change. When the market starts to shift, people get a little bit scared. What's happening in the Boston real estate market?
So in the Boston real estate market, things are actually on fire. I really was not expecting this. This is on the residential end I'm talking about. Okay. So like on the residential end, things are still going like way over asking, 50K over, 75K over, 100K. And which is crazy because I speak to my friends out in the West, like West Coast or even Midwest, and they're like, oh, our property values are declining. And I'm like, that is so not the case here. But things are cooling down when it comes to investors. For example, like investment properties are having a hard time moving because with interest rates, they're just not selling where they're supposed to. But anything that goes to end consumer has been still really like insane because of the housing shortage and the desirability of Boston. However, like anything on the investments and commercial side is really starting to take a dip.
So interesting. And so here's an interesting part is, so what is some of your advice for people who are wanting to invest and become developers, but they're first time developers? Because you just talked about some of the challenges, and I would say some of those are the same ones down in Florida with investors because the interest rates have gone up, and even the lending guidelines have gotten tighter for investors. Sometimes it's not the interest rate that made it unreachable, so they need private money or they need a different source. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, for a first time investor, I always say you've got to surround yourself with individuals that you want to be like, right? So like who is playing in your marketplace, who is buying what you want to buy, and really just kind of pick their brain and just be like, hey, I'm interested in this. Like, what are you doing right now? And like, how's your portfolio looking? And how are you making your executive decisions? Because I think it's very important. Every market's so different. And I say real estate's a local business. So tapping into those investors and those people are going to be key. Even lenders, right? Like, hey, what are your clients doing? Like really tap into the people in those relationships. That's rule number one. And because from that point on, you'll know how to evaluate deals. I mean, if you don't know your numbers right now, or if you don't have multiple exit strategies set up, you're in for it.
That's such a great way to do it. So let's talk about that, the multiple exit strategies. I used to talk about that when I first got into real estate, and people were like, what do you mean an exit strategy? And I'm like, well, they're like, we haven't even bought it. I'm like, yeah. Before you buy it is when you need to be looking at your exit strategy. And they're like, it's so cute. They're like, but it's like dating. I'm not even sure I want to get married yet. So why are you talking about the exit strategy? I'm like, with real estate, you have to talk about exits, and you need to not only have one. So will you talk a little bit about exit strategies?
For sure. Yeah. So whatever you buy, before you even put pen to paper, before you even put an offer together, you better know how you're going to be exiting this deal, and you better know how you're going to be financing this deal and how the numbers are working for you. Those three things. So super key. So for example, if you're buying a multifamily property, you've got to make sure A, it cash flows, and B, if something happens in the market that is just like ridiculous, like rent control pops up or another COVID, who the hell knows, right? That you can sell it, right? And not lose your shirt on it. Anything new development, I would almost completely stay away from until the market or flips, until the market really starts to get itself together. It's too volatile right now. So you just want to make sure whatever you're buying, it's a safe investment. And so with that comes heavy negotiation. Like I come in and I'm like, okay, well, here are the two ways that it's going to work. These are the numbers. And I literally tell the listing agent or the seller or whoever, and I'm like, listen, this is my offer. And most of the time it's significantly less than what they're asking. I'll be like, and here's the objective criteria to back it up. Like, here are my numbers. And I recently got deals, approved for myself and clients, like 6 figures below asking because of this exact thing. But, numbers don't lie. So, but yeah, having all that analyzation done before and making sure, okay, hey, if I can't rent this, then I can sell this. Hey, if I can't sell this, then I can rent it. Just making sure you have backups, because you just don't want to get stuck with something,
Yes. And even like one thing I talked a lot with some of my clients is, well, sometimes you might want to look at rent. If you're going to rent it, could you short-term rent it? Are there regulations against you doing it? And recently, in fact, today, I just read an article that Airbnb is down like 50%. I don't know if that's a real number, but who knows? In the articles, I'm always like, that's a little suspicious, 50% down. But you need to understand that every single market is either getting better or it's getting worse. There's no market that's staying exactly the same. So where is the trend going? Whether it's long-term rentals, short-term rentals, when you're looking at your exit strategies, kind of need to know, where are you headed?
Exactly. And evaluate all of them. And it depends per the market, right? If you're in downtown metropolitan areas, those medium-term rentals are gold. If you're more in a suburban market that has great schools and, there's a lot of families that live there, you'll be all set with a long-term rental. Short-term rentals are glamorous looking, but they have their caveats, right? So medium-term rental, I find, is like that sweet spot where you're really profiting at a whole new angle. But then there's also co-living models as well, where you can rent by the room. So I think for any landlord kind of stepping into this next era of real estate, creative structuring of leases is going to be absolutely key to more cash flow, and the key to having quality tenants, and I think less risk as well.
Yeah, I think that's a huge pearl of wisdom that so often that people are again not thinking about. And so I want to switch gears now with you, because you have your background in restaurant. Let's talk a little bit about the commercial market, like retail. So like with the pandemic in Washington D.C., it was fascinating to see, and fascinating from a real estate market perspective. It was a little sad for a lot of our commercial restaurants couldn't survive in the pandemic because it was too long, and they just couldn't tolerate not being able to pay the rent. They only had so much forgiveness, and then they became takeout places or they closed. But now if you come to Washington, D.C., there are all these new restaurants and new people that have come in. And we've seen the rents are very stable in there, where before there was a time when we thought, oh, they're all going to go crashing down because everybody's working from home now. And so they're not going to restaurants for lunch or for dinner as much. So what are you guys seeing in that area?
So we're seeing more of like less retail footprint and more like warehouse footprint, and like also kind of almost like incubators for restaurants as well, where it's like small booths or commissary kitchens and things like that. And that's truly the best way to start a business, right? Like if you want to start a restaurant, you shouldn't have to be expected to have like 500K to $1 million, right? Like the
Right.
risk levels, that's the reason why so many people went under. But if it was something like a shared risk space where you're only paying not too much per month, like 1,000 or 1,500, and there's a bunch of other restaurants in the same kitchen, if you will, or the same co-op, if you will, then it kind of breaks up the risk, and it's not as heavy and it's not as bad. I mean, the world is really shaping around convenience when it comes to especially food. So delivery is really everything. It depends on your style, right? If people want that sit down experience, they're gonna go for that, right? But also having like the takeout end of it, it just depends on the type of business for sure. But definitely the retail footprint is also undergoing some major renovations for this next era of real estate for sure.
I agree. I was going to say, it just feels like things are changing, which again, I find that some people get really scared when it's changing, and it's okay for change. I mean, the thing to know is that it's always going to change, and sometimes that is like the best benefit you could ever imagine. I mean, I'll tell you, I love to have my groceries delivered. I love not going and spending hours in the grocery store anymore. I love going,
Yep.
the regular things I get. And then when I go click, 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 and having them just show up on my doorstep and not having to spend all that time there. And that obviously, I mean, there was delivery before, but it not anywhere near to the extent because of COVID. So change can be good, right?
Convenience. Yeah, it's all about convenience, and everyone is now so dedicated to having more time, right? They saw what they could do with COVID and how much time they got back. So I think much like you were talking about, like the delivery of groceries, a lot of people are shifting to that model of convenience. And so thus real estate has to shift with that type of demand.
I agree. And I think probably one of the things you said earlier, about your passion to make sure that people are educated and they understand, that knowledge, there's the old saying, knowledge is power, but it's really power only if you understand how you can implement it for whatever situation you're looking at, whether it's residential real estate, whether it's commercial real estate, it's one of those. And I know that's one of the big things that you do with your clients is you make sure that you, not only that you educate them, but you also help them understand how to analyze a property. Will you talk a little bit more about when a client comes in, how do you do that? And because one thing I've learned over the years as well is some people take very well to that. And then other people, they get a little offended thinking that they already know, that they know best. And they don't want you to be teaching them something that they feel like they should have already known. And they maybe just don't want to admit that they don't know.
Yeah, no, analyzing the property is super, super key because I mean, it depends on what your long-term strategy is, right? Like, what is your intention on purchasing this property first and foremost? And you analyze it accordingly. Is it just an investment property? Okay, great. Well, then let's figure out what's your cash on cash return on that. What's the long-term appreciation? How much equity can this property bring you equity over time? Or is it not really like an appreciative market, just stay kind of flat? How's the rent? How's the cash flow? I mean, like all of these things that they should be thinking about. And more often than not, like a lot of clients have no idea. They're like, oh my God, this is like an investment decision. I'm like, yeah, it is. And it all comes down to the numbers. The only thing that should ever be emotional is your primary residence. Aside from there, like numbers have to come into the game. And I find that oftentimes people are like, oh my God, thank you for pointing that out. Like, I want to make sure that I'm making the right investment decision. It's a huge one, right? So yeah, that's been my experience with it.
Good. And that's, I think the most important one is really just continuing to communicate. Even if somebody starts to get a little shy or something, just go, hey, is there something there that you didn't understand? Let's
Yep.
talk through it. If people get to quiet, then you're like, okay, let's just keep chatting until we know for sure. And it's okay to say no, when somebody, and I always try to make sure that people know it's okay if this investment is not for you, or this particular property is not for you. We just want to present the best thing.
Yes.
Right?
Totally.
Yeah. And I think that's how you said you saved so much money as well when you're presenting an offer, is you just keep communicating to make sure they understand.
Yeah, just tell the seller, hey, here's the numbers. Here's why it does not work. And here's why I needed to be here. And if that works for you, great. If not, like, I hope you can find like an owner user that will pay a little bit more, but an investor is just not going to do it. But the thing that's happening now is there's a lot of investment properties that are coming on that need a lot of work. And the typical buyer can't do like a full gut renovation or anything like that, right? Only investors can. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of owners, what I find, even though it's an investment property, and as you said, you shouldn't be emotional about any of them, but they get offended when you say, no, that's not $100,000 worth of work. That's more like $300,000 worth of work. And they don't like that. And yet I'm like, well, when was the last time you actually had estimates in here? Do you know exactly what it would cost, with all the challenges that we have out there in the market, not only with contractors, but with supplies and things of that nature? It's not the same as maybe what you had when you had it 20 years ago. So that's a story that needs to be told when you're presenting an offer so that you don't offend people, and also to see if we can have a meeting of the minds. And sometimes, and I'm sure you've had this too, there's not a meeting of the minds today, but there might be after they've thought about it and how little time has passed by, and they're okay with really looking at it. And I hate to say, looking at what's happening now, not being stuck in a different time.
Totally. Absolutely. The more you can communicate with them and be as transparent and showcase the numbers, the better for you.
Yeah.
In getting that offer accepted.
Pamela, what's your favorite part of the business?
My favorite part is the people, honestly, like, like getting and looking at a deal and seeing like, okay, what can I do with this? How can we analyze this? What can we do long-term with it? Like every property has a story. And I think that's the greatest part. And then, connecting with the sellers is definitely amazing too. So the people part is definitely my fave. And the problem solving.
And I was going to say, it's almost like puzzle pieces. You're like, okay, I got all these pieces. Now, how do I get the pieces to fit together? And then that also means for the people, how do I get their desires and their wish list, whatever that is, to, match with a property that's out there that's going to give them their numbers or whatever they desire, including if somebody desires to just be completely hands off, they want someone else to manage it. Well, that's a completely different number than if you're just going to be a mom and pop and you're just going to manage yourself. That's different.
Exactly. Totally with you on that one.
Yeah, it's
totally
so important. So I know we're almost out of time. So I want to make sure that people know a little bit more about your podcast and anything you want to share so that people can get in touch with you.
For sure. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So I do have a podcast. It's called Underdog, and we talk all about like who you are, where you've been, where you're going. And so feel free to join in on those beautiful stories there and to listen in on your episode, Jennifer, that's upcoming soon. Yeah. I'm so excited for that one to launch. So stay tuned for Jennifer's episode because that is the one For sure. And then you can most certainly reach out to me on Instagram, LinkedIn. Really, those are the two places that I'm most active. And then also my website, www.pamelabardhi.com. And you can find me there. And even on IG, I'm the most active. So any questions on anything, like we were talking about, like the analyzing of deals and stuff like that stuff can get super complicated, but I love that stuff. So
It's funny. I feel like we get like kind of nerded out on that stuff because it's like, well, wait a minute. What if we did this and let's analyze it this way? And, and I'm sure you do too. Sometimes I call the tax experts in and I go, okay, so let's talk about the tax aspect, because maybe the whole benefit is in the tax part of it, which again, as real estate people, we're not necessarily the tax experts. We can't pretend we're attorneys and we can't pretend we're tax experts, but you have to look at all those aspects, right?
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. At least to the best of your ability, like run preliminary numbers for sure.
Yeah. Or again, advise people to go talk to their favorite tax person or attorney if they need to. So anyway, as you know, when I finish my episode, I always love to ask my guests to raise your voice and say yay with me. Would you do that?
Yes.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Yay!
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela.
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You may